Okay, so this is going to be my video log on classical form as a follow-on from the narrowing the scope log. Um, so, as I said in that vlog, elements of narrowing down the scope and having some academic grounding came from the idea of classical music frameworks. um, so, essentially, the final project is intended to be a sonata piece, a symphonic piece, and an overture piece. So in this sort of log, the plan is to talk you through the sort of structure of each of these, and maybe give you some little audio examples of things that accurately represent them and things that don't. So we're going to start off with sonata form, as that's the most common. It's used in a lot of different types of classical music. You know, it's used in obviously sonatas. It's used in symphonies. It can be used in operas. So it's a very versatile form, and it's also one of the most common ones that you will come across. So essentially, it's a 3-section structure. So as I'll mention in the overture section later, it's fast, slow, fast. So your first movement of it is fast, then you go into a more slow lyrical section, and then back to a faster section. A sonata will establish 2 key themes. The first one being quite a dominant sort of powerful theme. So as I mentioned in the last video, in the sonata movement of Beethoven's Fifth, that's the first theme that he establishes essentially, and he goes on to embellish that and move it around and sort of reiterate different things about it. And then he establishes a second theme, which is much softer and more lyrical, and these are described as masculine and feminine melodies. So each theme in the first section of a sonata, the fast section, is called the statement section, and that establishes each theme in its entirety. So there are a couple of things to note about this. The first theme, the dominant theme, is always in the home key. So if you're in C major, your first dominant theme will be in C major. Your second theme is not in the home key. So that's not in, it wouldn't be in C major, it'd be in a different key completely. That's important because that's something that is relevant to the end of a sonata form, the sonata piece. So then we move through into the exposition or the development phase. Now this will take the 2 themes that you've established already, and it will twist them and turn them and manipulate them and just messes with them. These sections often move through several different keys, and they can also experiment with rhythmic phrasing, time signature, instrumentation, harmony, all of these sort of different things, dynamic, timbre, everything like that. This is a phase to push the themes as far as they can go, and really experiment with them and see what you can do with them. And then we move into the recapitulation section, which is the final section. And this restates the 2 themes from the initial statement, the exposition phase. However, whereas in the statement section, these 2 themes were in different keys, they're now both in the home key. So like I was saying earlier, if they were in C major, they would now both be in C major. And this restates the themes in their entirety from the first part of the sonata. They're typically performed at a fast pace, like I say, fast, slow, fast. But the fast sections will be fast. They're meant, they're typically allegro. So that's your sonata form. We then move into overture forms. Now I've got a little example of something here for this. So there are two different types of classical overture. There's the French overture and the Italian overture. Now the Italian overture is modelled almost identically to the sonata form, but multiple themes can be established. It doesn't just have to be restricted to two. However, the French overture juxtaposes this with a slow, fast, slow tempo structure. So, I don't have any particular examples of a classical overture that's used, but in modern overtures there aren't particularly these strict rules. And when I initially looked into this idea of using classical frameworks, I wasn't aware that there were rules for an overture. So I've got a little example of an overture by a progressive metal band called Dream Theater from one of their more recent albums, and there are elements of it that I do believe follow overture form and sonata form in a way. But there's, like I say, there's so many different themes being established that it is difficult to find any distinct rules in there. It's a stitching together of theme is what it is. So this is a little example. I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but this is an example of an overture by Dream Theater at the start of an album that is completely conceptual, and all of these themes that are played in this piece are heard again later in the album. So I'm not going to play the whole thing, but here we go. So this part's quite slow, so you'd maybe think this is more French style overture. Because this theme develops a little bit. So we move into the second theme there. And then if we move it forward a little while, so you see it's all played at a pretty similar tempo here. So by this point, we're about halfway through it now, and we realise that if anything, it's picking up in tempo, and it wasn't that slow to begin with. And then here we get this really slow movement, which does make you think it's more of an Italian overture rather than the French. It's strange. And this is why I think there's a problem in terms of trying to define modern bands trying to do overtures accurately and authentically. It's just a stitching together of theme. So we'll stop that there. So it is difficult to sort of define how these things work. But for the purpose of my project, I will be sticking to either a French overture or an Italian overture theme and structure, rather than the more modern style of not really having any particular rules. So finally, we'll go into symphonic form. I'll try and get through this quickly so the video is not too long. So symphonic form, symphonies are typically broken down into 4 movements. Each movement has several smaller elements within it, and each movement is different and has its own unique framework. So movement 1 is the sonata allegro, which is the sonata form, as I've discussed already. And it's exactly as you would expect it to be. Movement 2 is the adagio, and this is a much slower movement than this sonata allegro. It's a palate cleanser. Um, what comes to the forefront here is that it should be slow and lyrical, and melody should be of really high importance, and use of harmony that's satisfying. Um, as well as this, there's a lot of variation in this movement. So they typically move between 5 and 15 different variations of the initially established theme, um, and sometimes by the end of the movement, the initial theme is completely unrecognizable from what it's become, um, and that's a really interesting thing. And I think this is one of the moments where the more technical side of progressive rock music could shine, you know. Um, and it develops the theme with alterations to ensemble, key, dynamics, harmony, all these sort of things that we've discussed about the sonata form. Um, so we then move into movement 3, and the other thing to note is movement 2 and movement 3, the adagio and the one we're going to talk about next, the scherzo. These can be interchangeable. They're up for debate as to what should be where. Typically, it's adagio in movement 2 and then the scherzo in movement 3. But some composers do change this around. So, the scherzo was something that Beethoven introduced. It was originally a minuet movement. So, typically this movement is in triple meter. So it's in like 3/4, something of that ilk. Scherzo translates to joke, so that would suggest that the movement would be more light-hearted in tone. This isn't always the case. Some of Beethoven's scherzos are really dark and quite difficult to listen to. So these establish 2 key themes, and they're separate to those that are presented in previous movements. So they're usually accompanied by what's called a trio. So you'll establish the themes, then you'll have the trio section, which is in ABA form. So you establish a theme, you establish a second theme, and then you re-establish the first theme. And then you move back into the original scherzo, so you re-establish that. Similarly to the sonata in terms of structure, but obviously you're establishing two completely new themes in the trio section, and then reverting back to your initially established theme for the second part of the scherzo. These are typically quite fast, and then we move into the finale, which can be presented in sonata allegro form or in rondo form. So rondo form can be presented as a 5 or 7 piece rondo, in which the main theme is interrupted by new varying themes. So you establish a theme, you then present a new theme. You re-establish the first theme, you establish a new theme, and you can do that up to 5 or 7 degrees. These movements are high in energy, they're powerful, fast-paced, and they can almost feel hurried sometimes. So, whereas the sonata allegro is fast, this is very fast. And this should end, it should be a triumphant lift at the end of all of the development and the sort of manipulation that you've done to these themes of music. And you can also restate themes from the sonata movement here with further development, and it provides a sense of home. So you don't have to, that's an option, but you can relate back to earlier themes in this section, and sort of bring it all together. It's like the culmination of all of your hard work. So that is my video log on the 3 key classical structures that I'm going to be looking at for this module and this final project. So there will be a piece composed in symphonic form, a piece composed in sonata form, and a piece composed in overture form.